Firstly, a very big welcome to everybody. And it's very heartwarming to see how many people are actually keen to learn a bit about FBIS. It makes our job so much more rewarding to know that there's a lot of interest here. And just by virtue of, I think this is the first time I've been in a Zoom meeting where I've got 4 pages of people in the gallery. So that's just fantastic. Thank you all so much for registering and for being willing to learn about the FBIS. What we've planned for the session is, because this is the first session of the series, I thought, and especially since, browsing through the list of registrations, some of you are not very familiar with FBIS, so I'm going to literally start with a 10-minute overview just to sort of set the stage and make sure we're all on the same page. And thereafter, we will go into a pre-recorded first video tutorial, which has been done by Jeremy, walking around the system, and then we'll open up for some Q&As. So let me first share my screen. In the meanwhile, I see you are all on mute, so thanks for that. If you have questions as we're running through either my introductory section or Jeremy's presentation, please feel free to type in the chat. We can do the questions afterwards, both via the chat records and also just by way of putting up hands once we are ready. Okay, so firstly, here we go. First, sorry, that didn't work very well. Let me start with the first slide. That would be useful. Okay, so again, welcome everybody, and thanks for being here today and for committing to being part of the training. So what is FBIS? It's the Freshwater Biodiversity Information System, and it's essentially a system developed in South Africa for mobilizing, visualizing, and reporting on our freshwater biodiversity data. And it was very much a user-driven information system. We, as the Freshwater Research Centre, are the lead organization, but we're not doing it in a silo, and we've been working very closely with our technical developers, Cartosa, and our primary stakeholder, SANBI. But obviously, the whole of the FBIS system has included a number of other key partners. And we wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't been along the journey with all of you. So I'm not going to mention everyone individually, but we've had a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals that have been involved from the start of the project. And you might recognize some of your faces in our various shots. From the get-go, we had a very specific approach for developing this information system, in that we wanted to be guided by what you, the end users, needed, and use this to inform both the system design and the functionality at the end of the day. And in that way, we hope that we've created a system that is going to be useful for everybody. And obviously, we included a range of personas, from water resource managers to biodiversity conservation managers and planners, scientific researchers, as well as environmental consultants. Just by way of a bit of a time frame, and just to mention, the key funder of the project is the JRS Biodiversity Foundation from the US. They've been funding, this is our third sort of project they've funded. And then we've had some co-funding from our key partner, SANBI. So the project kicked off in August 2016. So we're almost 5 years into the project now, with a small planning grant. This was then followed by a technical grant, which we call Phase 1, where we developed the first components of FBIS, which I will unpack in a little while. And we released the first version 3 in July 2020, which was a very big milestone for us as the group developers. And then we are currently in our second phase, which is to run till 2024. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to just unpack very briefly the 5 sort of pillars of FBIS, so that you can see how this all fits together in a structure, and that'll make the whole training sessions a little bit easier. Okay, so the core currency is obviously biodiversity data, and this includes not only absolute biodiversity data or occurrence data, but also indices that are derived from that data. And in this version of FBIS, the main indice we include is SAS, which is the South African scoring system, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So in phase 1, we focused on fish inverts and algae for rivers in South Africa. And then we also brought in adult odonate data from the virtual museum. So this formed the body component, and we consolidated data from a range of sources, including scientific articles, published data from reports and theses, databases, including the rivers database, the legacy databases, and the FBIS, as well as a whole host of unpublished data, which was often provided by you, the freshwater community, to us to bring into the FBIS and make available to everybody. Phase 2, which we're currently in, includes what's already been done, the Neuron module, which is up and running. And then the big expansion is to not only include river data, but to include inland wetland data. And we're working very closely with colleagues at FRC and SANBI to bring in fish invert algae, as well as plant data, which will be a new module for this phase. Okay, then the second real pillar of FBIS is the companion physicochemical data and various sort of abiotic data like biotopes and morphometry for rivers in phase 1, but then expanded that to include a thermal module, which is water temperature time series data for rivers specifically, as well as a module for uploading physicochemical / water quality data, not only for wetlands, but also available for rivers if that data exists. So this forms the abiotic component. Then we link and we lean very heavily on third-party data. We don't believe in bringing everything into one system, and we rely on synergistic relationships between information systems. So we bring in data from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. We link, which includes, by the way, our naturalist research grade data. So we're tapping into citizen science data, which is really, really valuable. We also rely on the IUCN for conservation status. We link with our partner award for the DWS water quality data via their inward system. And then we also present data, citizen science data for mini-SAS, as well as the virtual museum. Then biodiversity data, it's really important to be able to visualize this data within a spatial framework. And for this, we have brought in what we call context data. And this essentially includes layers, which allow you to produce maps and visualize data, as well as filters, which allow you to select a subset of data for viewing. And in phase 1, because it was river focused, we included things like geomorphological zones, as well as things like ecoregions. And then in phase 2, we're going to be expanding to include the national wetland map, as well as various things like flow and thermal frameworks, which are actually already in the system. Then the fifth and final sort of pillar of FBIS relates to the metadata. We strongly believe that every single occurrence record should have information about the source of the information or the source reference. And so we have a knowledge database that works in the background that allows you to link to downloadable PDFs or DOIs, etc. And these 5 pillars together form the Freshwater Biodiversity Information System, which is available to you, the freshwater community, for decision-making, etc. Okay, so a platform is born. This is the current state of it. We've got 5 modules, biodiversity modules, and over 500,000 occurrence records, which are at your fingertips, ready to be used and to make a difference in conserving and managing our freshwater systems. And obviously the most important, or one of the most important foci of FBIS is to allow us to track long-term change. And we've got a lot of graphics and visualizations that allow you to visualize and get data both spatially and across temporal scales. And through the training sessions that we have over the next few months, you will be able to learn how to do this in quite a detailed. Okay, the last few things I wanted to mention, very exciting. Even since I made this slide last night, we've now got over 500 user registrations on FBIS across over 230 organizations, and including a big range from national, regional, and local government sectors, as well as tertiary institutions, nonprofits, and environmental consultants. So very heartening to see, a lot of sector diversity in terms of the interest in FBIS. For those who are interested, there is this scientific publication in the African Journal of Aquatic Science on FBIS. And lastly, I wanted to just share with you that whilst we developed FBIS for South Africa, and this is by far the most advanced system at the moment, it did result in a knock-on projects where we released a version for Rwanda, the ARBIS system, as well as one for Botswana, specifically the Okavango Delta. And we're hoping by way of developing a generic system that allows for expansion into other parts of the country, indeed the world, that we may see versions of FBIS expanded across the continent, and as I say, potentially up to Europe. And what this means is it improves the sustainability for the system, and we've got what we call the mothership, or the Biodiversity Information Management System, which is the back engine. That's the engine of the whole system that runs all of these information systems that are currently in existence. Okay, so that's all I wanted to share with you by way of the introduction, and just giving you a look and feel of the broad FBIS project so that we all get on the same page. And then what we're going to dive into now is the first of 10 sessions, weekly sessions that you're all aware of because you've all registered, running between now and early November. And then this will be followed by a second lot of sessions. Sorry, the first lot of sessions will really be diving into the functionality and the dashboards and how you add data. And this would all be focused mostly on biodiversity data. Then we're going to have a break for the holidays, and in February, we'll start another series, which is going to be more focused on the abiotic side of things, including water temperature or the thermal module, as well as physicochemical or water quality data. And we may well add a few more modules to this, or sessions to this, depending on the requests of you, the community that are doing the training, as well as our partners, if there's anything specific we want to focus on. Okay, so I'm going to end that side of things, and I'm now going to move over to the pre-recorded video that Jeremy Shelton did for us. By the way, it's Jeremy's birthday today, so I think that's why we've got such good attendance. As he said, everyone wants to wish him well. So I'm going to kick off and play this video, and then we'll open up for some questions and discussion after the session. Excellent.
Welcome everybody to this series of FBIS tutorials. We're going to be starting off slow and introducing you to the platform, and then walking you through all of the most common and important workflows that can be done through the FBIS, and there'll be opportunities to ask questions and to discuss any aspects of what we show you in this series. So we're really looking forward to it. Thanks very much for joining us for this training series. And without further ado, let's get started with the first training video, which is an introduction to the different components of FBIS. So to start off with, you can see the FBIS landing page. The URL for the platform is freshwaterbiodiversity.org. So if you type that in to your search bar, you'll land on this page. And you can see that for first-time users, there's an option to sign up. But I'm already signed up, so I'll hit the login page and I will sign in as Jeremy. And that actually signing in takes you straight into the map interface. But before we go to that, I'd like to just show you a little bit around the landing page first. So on the landing page here, you're presented with a summary of biodiversity records for the different modules that are currently on the platform. There are fish, anurins, invertebrates, adult odonates, and algae at this stage, with a few more in the pipeline. And you can see a little breakdown of the numbers of records and sites for each module. For example, for fish, there's just over 45,000 records for over 10,000 different sites for South Africa. And then at the bottom here, there is some other useful information. So there's shortcuts to the homepage and to the map. There is a button that takes you to documents and reports associated with the platform. There's a contact page, and there's also a button that explains how to cite the FBIS. And this is something that we encourage anybody who uses data from the platform to do. So just to show you, if you click on one of these, for example, citation, it takes you to the citation guidelines for FBIS. All right, so back to the homepage, and by hitting the, and also you can see there are some links along the top here as well, some shortcuts as well to some of the main tabs. So if I hit explore, that takes one straight to the map interface, which is the main interface of the FBIS platform. And you'll see that what loads here is a map of South Africa with the rivers layer showing. So you can see all the rivers for the country, and you can see biodiversity data points as well in yellow. And we're in the process of adding the wetlands map as well, which is going to be quite exciting. So most of the functionality can be found here on the top left in this menu bar. And I'm going to walk you through some of the main different tools that can be found in this bar and that can be used to help you, the users, improve the power and the ease of your data queries and searches and visualizations on the platform. So starting from the bottom and working up, here we have an option to use different base maps. At the moment, the default is set to the Bing satellite hybrid. So it's really a satellite map for South Africa, which we find to be mostly the most useful map. But there are other options as well. For example, there's an aerial photography layer that can be used. You can just look at topography. And you may just be interested in the terrain. So this may be a useful feature depending on the kind of search you're interested in. Then moving up to the next button, this is by clicking on this little icon here, it allows you to copy the history of your search and share that with someone else, or make a note of it for yourself so that you can very quickly use that link again in the future to repeat one of the searches you've previously done. Then there's the option to save the map as a PDF. At this stage, it's really just the map, the rivers, and the data points. But as you'll see as we work through these tutorials, you can visualize different spatial filters on the map as well. And that's when it can become quite useful to save an image of the map. Then the next button is the locate button. And this can be used to locate a site or an area of interest. And you can locate it using the spatial coordinates of the site, where you would enter the latitude and longitude of a known site, or you can use the farm portion code. For example, you may know the code of the farm in the area that you're interested in. All right, then we have a tab here which is called third-party layer selection. Now, third-party layers are other online databases that the FBIS has links with. And at this stage, we have two of these. We have the mini-SAS database and the inwards water quality database. So by turning on one of these, for example, the mini-SAS, that will then show data from the mini-SAS citizen science online database on top of the FBIS map. So these are actually shown in different little crab symbols, different colors representing different ecological conditions of a river or river health. And they're quite small, but if I zoom into an area, you can see that in the area around Pietermaritzburg, there are actually a lot of these little mini SAS data points. And the way that I zoomed in there actually was also quite interesting. If you hold down the shift bar and then you drag your mouse, you can select the size of the area into which you want to zoom. It's a really neat and quick way to explore different parts of the map. So I'll zoom back out using the little minus button at the top of the search bar so that I can see the whole of South Africa again. And I'll close the third-party layer selector and move on to the layer selector. Now, this is a really useful tool for visualizing different management and conservation and other kinds of spatial layers. The default is just showing the sites and the rivers, but there's really a wealth of different layers that can be used here to help visualize the data in different ways. I'm just going to turn off the mini SAS data. It'll make the little crabs disappear. And so, for example, I might want to turn on the national dams layer. And at the click of the button, then all of a sudden, the dams appear for South Africa. So if I zoom in to the area around Cape Town, you can see some of the main water supply dams immediately visible in the greater Cape Town area. Another commonly used layer is the strategic water source areas. And again, at the click of a button, you can then view the different key strategic water source areas for South Africa, which are very useful in a lot of conservation planning and management applications. And this is when it starts to get, as you add these layers to the map, we may also want to add, let's see, maybe fish sanctuaries. I'm really a fish biologist, so I'm very interested in where the different fish sanctuaries are located relative to the data points. And that's when it becomes really useful to use this button here to print the map with your selected spatial layers. Now, I'd like to point out that this list of spatial layers is quite exhaustive. And it's a growing list as well. So we're constantly adding new layers to complement the biodiversity data. So it's a living resource. And the majority, or at least some of these layers, can also be used as filters, but not all of them. In some cases, layers are just for visualizing data. In other cases, they can be used to filter the data. And that's what we really get into in the second session of this training series. Right, the next tab is called the lasso control, and this is one of my personal favorites. This is, again, I'm just going to zoom into a part of the map and show you how you can use the lasso tool to draw a polygon around a group of sites. For example, this little area here, we may know this area very well, be interested in just the sites falling within this area of the map. And once you've drawn around the area that you're interested in, you can then hit update the search, and then that'll filter just by the records in that particular area. And that's really neat way and a very flexible tool for custom selections of data points, and a way to do custom filtering. So let me close that and use this little reset arrow here to just get back to the map. All right, and then the last, but certainly not the least important tab on the search bar are the filters. And here we have a range of different kinds of filters, all the way through from being able to select the kinds of data that you're interested in with respect to the different biodiversity modules, right the way through down to the specific reference or study reference or reference category for the type of data that you're interested in. But that is really the focus of training session 2. So I hope you enjoyed the first session, and looking forward to seeing you in the next one.
Okay, everybody. So, as we've decided with the sessions to keep it short and sweet, and rather focus on small, sort of what we're calling F-bites of information that allow you to slowly get to grips with FBIS and build up your knowledge and insight of the system going forward. So I think, thanks, Jem, for that overview. What I'd like to do now is open it up to any questions. You can just put your hand up. I see there are some questions in the chat. Perhaps, Jeremy, you can talk to those, or you can, because I can't do the chat and watch the hands. So let's just focus on maybe just going through the chat questions first, and then we'll open it up to the hands for anyone who wants to ask specific questions. Maybe you can just read out the questions, Jem, for everybody to see, and then we can deal with each one as they come.
Thanks, Helen, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, we do have a few questions in the chat, and I think the first one relating to the training video was just a comment from Jackie J. Great to see the water source areas layer available on the platform, and a question about Ramsar sites, whether a layer for that is available. And Helen, as far as I know, it's not a layer that's available yet, but I think is one that we have in the pipeline, but I may stand corrected there.
That's absolutely spot on. Yeah, not in yet, but we're going to be bringing in quite a lot more layers through working, on the wetlands module with Sandy, etc. And that has been one that's been highlighted. That would be really useful. So thanks for that.
Great. Okay, then we have a second question from Kagiso, who asks, is it possible to link the data in FBIS to ArcGIS?
Yeah, so at the moment there's no ArcGIS or QGIS. Obviously, ArcGIS is proprietary software, and FBIS is built on the whole sort of open source policy. So what you can do is extract your data of interest and pull it into your ArcGIS or QGIS through the CSV, because each data point has an occurrence record, but there isn't any direct link to ArcGIS. Okay.
We have a question from Jane Trenbath, who asks if it's going to be possible to search for a site by name and to save your local sites to your profile. So thanks for that question, Jane. And yeah, you're right on point with that, and it's going to be the focus of one of the upcoming training sessions, searching for sites, adding sites, cataloging sites. But just to sort of comment on it for now, yes, that is one of the main searches available, site-specific search. We've got a question from Sive Kolisi, who asks whether he can extract the layers to other GIS softwares. So, Helen, I can probably respond to that, but at this stage, we're not making these layers available for downloading from FBIS. We're just serving them spatially or for querying and filtering data. But it is a question that's come up in the past. It's a conversation we are sort of having and something we are mindful of. Helen, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I just think, when obviously we're getting the layers mostly through Sanby if they're available, because obviously Sanby and BGIS, they're the most sort of reliable curators of the layers. And we hope to be able to allow downloading of layers, but we also want to make sure there's no copyright issues. So it does depend a bit, on the layers that will be requested.
Great. And then we have a question from Earl Graham, who asks whether the layers are available at various temporal scales.
Yeah, you mean like climate change, for example, where you might have different models predicted at different times. At the moment, the layers are the most recent available. So for example, the ecoregion layer was the layer published by DWS. If this was to be updated, then obviously we would make the link to the relevant updated layer so that the most recent is always served. But it's not like Google Maps or Google Earth where you can change your temporal scale and go backwards in time. These are stationary layers that are served as the most current available. Hope that answers your question, Earl.
Yeah, so I think it's quite a good question, because I mean, I guess as the new, for example, FIPA layer comes out, we will no longer be, serving the old one. The legacy one will be, like you said, like Helen said, will be serving the most up-to-date one. But maybe there will still be, if there is still a need for, serving not the latest layers, then that's something that we're open to. It's not really something we've considered before. So yeah, thanks for that comment. All right, Helen, we have a question from Rafilware Chilo, who asks whether there are any plans to include a layer for wetland sites directly on the FBIS or via a third-party database.
Thanks, Rafilware. So the wetland sites will be added in the same way that river sites are added. So if there's wetland data associated with wetlands, it will be added or can be added. The national wetland map will be hopefully up in the next couple of months, month or two. It's in its final stages of being finalized by Sanby, Nancy and Adwa and the team. And then in terms of wetlands, we are also aware of the fact that sometimes it's not a specific site, but that it's actually a polygon. So we will also be bringing in some functionality to sort of have a wetland polygon for the wetland layer or the wetland site. Hope that answers your question adequately.
Thanks, Helen. I think it does. And you preempted the next question, which was from Prasheen Singh, who asks whether the Sanby National Wetland Map will be served via FBIS. I think you've already covered that. That's underway. And then the second part to Prasheen's question is whether NBA layers are also available on FBIS, and the answer to that is yes, they are. We've included the majority of the layers from the NBA, so you can find those all in the layer selector. And Prasheen then had another question about SAS and mini SAS data, asking whether SAS and mini SAS data are reviewed before publishing.
So I can jump in there since I wear the SAS hat as well as the biodiversity hat. So with the mini SAS data, the workflow is best to add the mini SAS data to the mini SAS database that is hosted by Ground Truth. I know they're currently in the process of updating that, and then we go and we link to that mini SAS database, because obviously mini SAS is order level, not family level. And then in terms of the SAS, I've gone blank. What was the question about the SAS?
It's are the data reviewed, Helen? So I think
okay, yeah.
maybe it speaks to
Sorry, just a senior moment there. Yes, so all data that enters FBIS, when it's first entered, it's unvalidated, and that includes an actual site. It requires an administrative person in the back end to go and check that you haven't plotted a site in the ocean accidentally, although it's a lot harder to do it when you've got a map in front of you. But certainly all data is reviewed. So the SAS data, we do review it. We've got some internal checks which allow us to, you wouldn't expect Perlidy to be recorded in the Western, in Cape Town, because they don't occur here. So we use geographic range as an automatic validation method. But then the administrator also reviews the data. But the reality is, without me, say, as a validator being in the field with you, I can't really check whether that data is accurate or not. I can only check whether you've included a taxon that shouldn't be in that particular river system, for example. So the onus is on the person to make sure the data they capture is captured correctly. And obviously with SAS, as you know, we do have an accreditation process. And when you capture data, when you capture SAS data, you are required to say whether you are SAS accredited or not. So, as a user wanting to use SAS data, if you only want the really high quality SAS data, you would click on only return validated and accredited data. And in that way, you can select the most sort of high confidence data on the system. I hope that answers your question.
I think it does, Helen. And just before we move on from Prashin's question, he did mention that it looks like our Zoom room is capped at 100. So that we are aware that there may be some people who are not able to join today. We will be sharing a recording, and we'll figure that out for the next one. So apologies for that. If that is the case, it seems to be. I think
because it's meant to be 300, but anyway, we will explore it. Yeah.
Okay. And so, yeah, just to remind you guys, you're welcome to ask questions in the chat as well as raising a hand. We're keeping an eye on the hand. So I think let's jump to Mark's question, and then we'll go back to the questions in the chat. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for a very interesting looking system. There are just three quick ones. One is actually in the chat, but I think you've missed it. The layers, are they map services, or are they updated automatically, or do you import the data into the system? The second question comes from also linked to the temporal issue. If you have information, you've got temporal data. Look at one of the graphs, you had temporal data there. If that temporal data is related to old layers, would we be able to bring it in old layers to sort of look at the interactions between the various layers? So, for example, threatened ecosystems changes over time. So you might want to see how many species are in threatened ecosystems. From change from 2011 to the 2018 threatened ecosystems. The last question is, it's probably a very silly question, but with regards to citation, at the moment we're looking at updating our Gauteng environmental outlook report in the coming year or so. If we were to use this data in our report, could we just do one citation for the whole data set, or do you have to do citations for individual areas? How would that work? Thank you.
Thanks so much for your questions, Mark. So in terms of the first, it's not automatically updated at the moment. But as I say, we do rely on the link with SANBI, and it does require a wall body at this stage to update the layers to make sure they are the most current. Although I would imagine going forward, we will look to automating that where we can. In terms of spatial layers changing over time, so I hear what you're saying. Really useful to be able to see, how protected areas or what have you have changed over time, and the occurrence records over time. So we, as I mentioned, we do serve the most current layer on FBIS at the moment. But again, this is a community system. So if there's a need to include some of the more legacy layers and allow sort of querying using older spatial frameworks and older filters, then I think that is something that we can certainly look into. And it wouldn't be difficult to include. It would just be your number of layers would then just obviously increase in the system. And then what I'd like to do is just quickly share my screen to talk to your last question, which is, and open up FBIS quickly. Regarding citation, so we are really keen to not only cite just the FBIS, but actually give due recognition to all the hard work and the data that is up in the system. So hopefully you can all see my screen, and right at the bottom of our landing page, you'll see text is rather small, but there's a thing here, citation, and Jeremy did mention it in the first, in his session. So what we have here is just the guidelines, and I updated this quite recently. So if you use FBIS in any report, we really hope that, or would love you to include the citation with the current date that you downloaded the data. But then you'll note here that if you use individual source references in your study, this does become available in our dashboards. And again, this is one of the training sessions we will dive into. So it's very easy to then get that data, that metadata, the source reference from the metadata table, and include it in your actual report or citation. The last two just refer to the reference manual, and the scientific article. But yeah, both citing FBIS and then citing the individual studies, so that due recognition is given to everybody who uses FBIS as a repository for their studies.
Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. We have another question in the chat from Jackie, who asks whether we will be adding data for other indices for rivers, for example, VegRI.
Thanks, Jackie. Not in the pipeline at the moment. So all of the ecostatus models are quite complex. I was involved with some of the very first VegRI work that was done under the old rivers database. And the discussion with DWS thus far has been to rather make the data readily available as a CSV in a format that can be easily plugged into the Excel-based ecostatus models. So no, at the moment, the complexity of the models means it's not going to be integrated into FBIS, but the workflow should be fairly easy to take data from FBIS and plug it into the Excel model for each of the ecostatus models, including VegRI.
Thanks, Helen. Amira asks whether it would be possible for us to share a recording of the session, because a few points were missed. And I think, yep, the answer there is yes, we are recording it, and yeah, it will be available online after the session and shared with everyone. We have a question from Nathan Baker, who asks, although the GIS layers are only presented in the most updated form, will temporal observation biodiversity data be available?
Absolutely, yes. So one of the key things that we'll dive into the next session is, the whole idea behind FBIS is to track long-term change. So the biodiversity data that gets uploaded obviously has a timestamp, which is the time, the sampling date that it was collected. So you can very easily keep track of data using different search criteria, and temporal criteria is one of them, which Jeremy will again expand on next week.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, that is really one of the focal points of the system. It was one of the initial reasons why we thought it was really important to create a platform where we can actually bring in data from historical data right the way through to current, to facilitate assessments of long-term change. And so, yeah, that's a core focal area, and hopefully something that's made a lot easier now than it's been 5 years ago, by using the different different querying and filtering tools that we'll get to in upcoming tutorials. All right.
Jim, I just want to jump in and share something quickly, which I think people will find useful. If we go back into the system, if you click on the help here, you will see a very recently updated manual, literally uploaded a day or two ago. And you might want to just download this as a guide for the training sessions, because a lot of what's included that we'll be talking to is also expanded in the user manual. Yeah, just really wanted to highlight that there is a user manual that's available, and please feel free to download it and share it amongst your colleagues.
Cool, thanks, Helen. We got a question from Tobishi, who asked whether it's possible for him to upload for users to upload and import their own layers into FBIS.
So at the moment, no. We have to manage layers centrally, because otherwise you could imagine there might be, over 100 that are on the system. But that being said, as this is a community platform, if you have a specific layer that you would really like to see up on FBIS, and it's one that is more generally used, please get in touch with us. Our email is fbis@frcsa.org.za. Maybe Jim can just punch it in the chat quick. We did in the initial stages on FBIS explore options to really expand on the customization potential for individual users. And I think your question very much speaks to that, as did the earlier question regarding wanting to see your own sites regularly. And maybe that is something we need to explore further to allow users to kind of customize a little bit what they see. But quite how it will work from a technical perspective, we'd need to consult with Cartosa, our technical developers, to see, how practical that is, etc. But thank you for that point.
Yeah, and it's not the first time that point has been raised. So yeah, made a note of that. Nathan Baker has another question, and this time it's how up to date are the biodiversity distribution records? What if there is some range expansion of certain taxonomic groups? Yeah, so the data is as up to date as the last data point added, which in some instances was yesterday. So it really speaks to users using the system as a repository for their information. Obviously, we've tried to pull in a lot of old historical data. It's by no means all in yet, especially for wetlands. There's a lot of work to be done. The focus on the phase 1 was really the Western Cape. So there's a lot of, legacy fish data and invertebrate and algal data in. But, part of the training sessions, our goal is to train the data providers. So train everybody who's in the session to be able to use and upload their own data. And that's not only individual record by record, but working with us, if you have large data sets that you want to put in terms of as a spreadsheet upload, we also have functionality to do that, but we're not yet training on that. We'd rather work with you individually through the admin side of things. But by training data providers, we hope that the data on the system remains as current as is possible. And just to add to that, we'll look at this in more detail in one of the upcoming training sessions, but the data served through the FBIS platform are come from quite an interesting mix of sources. Everything from users uploading individual data points right the way through to interoperating with big existing platforms like GBIF, which is updated and refreshed periodically. So we're not claiming to have all biodiversity data for freshwater that exists served on the platform, but there's been a big effort to collate a lot of those data, and there are new data coming in all the time. So it's yeah, the net is cast as wide as possible in that regard. All right, we had just a nice message from Belinda thanking us for the session, and thanks Belinda for joining. We had then another question from Ray Shala, who asks, would a user have the ability to see who has been inputting data into FBIS for a particular area or project? For example, are those data and authors trackable by email link or by literature references?
Good question. So you would be able to see who's created a site and or added data to a particular area through the metadata table, which we'll expand on as well in one of the training sessions. And where possible, we have links to that source reference, so details of the study or details of the unpublished data set, etc. But what we don't have yet is the inclusion of a way to email the person. So again, that speaks to sort of one's own profile and creating a sort of a way where people within the freshwater or the FBIS community can communicate with each other. I'd certainly understand why it would be useful if someone's working in an area that you focus on. It would be wonderful to be able to get in touch with them. So it's definitely, we will make a note of that and explore the expansion of the profile to allow maybe users to communicate within FBIS, to allow sharing of not only data, but resources perhaps for sampling, etc. Thank you. Good point.
Thanks, Helen. So we're coming up on the hour. It's gone quite quickly. And I think we've covered all the questions that have come up in the chat. If I missed any, please just re-enter your question and we will address it. So Helen, just a point that we may want to just make clear, when people are working through these tutorials on their own in their own time, maybe by rewatching the videos and come across something that's confusing or they'd like to ask, get input on, what's the best way for that to be done?
Probably just to send an email to the FBIS email, fbis@frcsa.org.za. That way it'll come to both Jeremy and I, as well as some of our colleagues. And what we'll do is to address that perhaps either directly with you, or if it's something we think will be useful for everybody else, we can share it. But what I was actually thinking about, and it was prompted by a colleague of mine, is what will be really useful is if we're getting some common questions throughout the series, what we will do is sort of make a bit of a frequently asked questions on the help menu. Maybe we include a frequently asked questions so that people, if there are, commonly asked questions, that it doesn't need to wait for a warm person, a warm body to answer, that it actually is dealt with on the FBIS platform. So I think that's what we'll try and action long term, but in the intermediate, just email the FBIS email with your question. Thanks.
That sounds good. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, are there any more questions? I'm a bit concerned about the 100 cap. That's a bit annoying, but I will investigate it a bit more. We were meant to be able to have 300, as I said. So thank you, Mark. Thanks, Casey. Please come and join us next week. I understand now and again you're going to miss one, but I think the engagement after the session is also really useful. And it's certainly, even in today's session, we've had a lot of ideas and new suggestions, coming forward. And it's always, Jeremy and I, as well as our numerous colleagues in FRC, Kate Snadden, Dean, Annery, Jeanette, as well as our colleagues at Sanby, Nancy, Adwa, Shlengiwe. We're all working to make this something that you find useful and that we can be proud of. And, you know, we often, sometimes you don't see the tree for the wood or the wood for the trees. And so your insight is good. And, you know, no question is a silly question. So please just keep them coming by email, and then join us again for the next session. Are there any more questions? We've got a few more minutes. Thanks everyone for your thumbs up.
Helen, I think one idea might be, you know, an additional channel for, because I mean, emailing questions through to us is fine, but it's quite nice to discuss and chat through the questions as much as possible, because I guess everybody else on the session can benefit from that. So I think what we can probably do is maybe just if people want to keep track of questions, and then in next week's session we can start off with just a quick a quick focus on those questions that have built up on the previous training session and chat about those. I think.
Agreed. That makes sense. 100%.
Cool.
Excellent, everyone. So again, I'm quite overwhelmed by everyone being here. So thank you. I know we all have busy lives. So really great to see you here. And from myself, thank you so much. And yep, we'll see you next week.